Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another Rise Zion episode. Today, we're going to be interviewing Seth about an area of his mission and a little bit of, practice that was happening at this time in his mission. So, Seth introduced us what it is that you're going to be talking about.
Yeah, so in our last episode, we talked a little bit about my area, Anacleto Medina, and I just wanted to actually clarify a few things before we get started. I was confused a little bit. I was reading in my journal, and the area's name is Anacleto Medina. It's not Anacleto y Medina, and that's actually because it's somebody's full name. So the city is actually named after a military person who was from Uruguay. So he's Uruguayan. And anyway, he was a military leader. So the city that I was in was called Anacleto Medina. Now, in the last episode, we also talked a little bit about what we referred to as a missionary side quest. So just to recap, we were talking about when we gave a blessing to an investigator named Sylvia, and we put our hands on her head, and then we gave a blessing, and we were talking about the spiritual significance of that, and we were speculating about some of the interesting things that happened. And one of those things was that we felt a through wind, and I thought that perhaps that was significant in some way. Wasn't sure about that, but I thought it was interesting that Ethan also had a correlating myth from his mission that spoke about this concept of being sick with a through wind. Could you also kind of recap that just briefly?
Yeah, sure. We called it a myth or a kind of belief from Latvia, kind of it's like embedded in pagan just beliefs that if you have a through wind or across like a draft in the house, two windows open, you could have one window open, that was fine. But if you had two windows or a door open or something, created a draft in the house, it was the reason or cause of becoming sick with something. And as far as I knew, it could be anything. I mean, maybe there's more specific things that people get sick with the draft going through the house, but as far as I knew as a missionary, it could cause any sort of illness.
Yeah. And I was making some sort of a connection there also with the idea that there's some spiritual aspect going on. Perhaps some folk wisdom might be going on, like a correlation between, people actually getting sick, maybe, or maybe there is some like deeper myth that has to do with kind of this wind going through, because also in the Bible, it does talk about during Pentecost, there is a wind that passes through the crowd of people. Yeah. All right. So this is the verse that we were talking about. So this is Acts chapter 2. And in Acts chapter 2, this is what's commonly referred to as Pentecost. And it says, "And when the day of Pentecost was fully come, they were all with one accord in one place. And suddenly there came a sound from heaven as of a rushing mighty wind, and it filled all the house where they were sitting. And there appeared unto them cloven tongues, like as of fire, and it sat upon each of them. And they were all filled with the Holy Ghost, and began to speak with other tongues as the Spirit gave them utterance." Anyway, and that goes on to explain the different spiritual manifestations that happened during this. And anyway, what?
So the connection here is that there's some sort of spiritual presence with wind,
Yeah,
or
that's
some
associated
sort of rooted
with the wind.
Spiritual.
Yes, and then that got us talking about a little side quest, a missionary side quest that we had mentioned in the previous episode. And this is that story. I had mentioned that in Anacleto Medina, I did not feel particularly welcomed, and that there was a prevalence of this witchcraft practice called Macumba. And the story actually has to do, again, with this wind phenomenon, which I found interesting. That I didn't actually record this in my journal. I didn't actually think it was that important, but it's always something that I had remembered that was an interesting thing and kind of a scary thing that happened on my mission that had to do with the darker side of spirituality, or the negative side of things, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think something that prospective missionaries and should know, and what return missionaries or serving missionaries know, is that there's opposition in all things. And so there seems to be a greater sense of opposition, especially while serving in the mission field.
Yeah.
So,
and this area was odd for this feeling of not being welcome. And this area, actually, there was a bridge that we had to cross in order to get into the area where we would frequently proselyte and do contacts. In this area, we were actually stopped at the bridge, and somebody tried to tried to rob us there. And that was, a point where we had to cross this bridge, and so this person would sometimes be waiting there. And we noticed in this time, Elder Birch and I just kind of whispered to him, walk faster, walk faster, walk faster. And so we walked sufficiently fast enough so that we could get onto the bridge before he stopped us in front of the bridge. And he was coming after us behind us, like trying to stop us. And so this all just plays back into this idea of opposition, right? In this area, I did not feel welcome. There seemed to be this high prevalence of this practice, Macumba, which I do believe is witchcraft, and I do believe it's a dark practice and an evil practice. Now, I want to make sure that I'm actually nuanced with my approach here. I don't want to malign anybody's spiritual beliefs at all, right? Because, I always get upset when people mischaracterize or misrepresent our beliefs as Latter-day Saints. And so I'm going to try to treat this with enough nuance so that people can get a sense of what we're talking about here, and in an accurate fashion. And I don't think I'm being inaccurate, but there are different branches of this spiritual practice. So I did research. I did some research into this spiritual belief in order to explain it more. This belief actually originates from Africa. This actually goes back to slavery, and back in the day, they were taken, the slave trade was alive and well back in the mid 16th century that they arrived in Brazil. And so Macumba actually is a colloquial term that means that it's just a word that people use to describe generally this practice. Okay, so it's not actually a specific practice. Although in Argentina, people did use the word Macumba or Macumba to refer to a practice. I'll come back to that a little bit more. So there are two main branches, as far as I can tell in my research. They're called candomblé and banda. And these are all Afro-Brazilian spiritual practices. It's kind of a combination of old African religion brought over from Africa, a combination of spirituality from the natives, I believe, and a combination of Roman Catholic belief. So it's kind of like a synchronistic religious practice. What I mean by synchronistic is a kind of a mix of all of these different belief systems. And a lot of times the people who practice these two branches of spirituality do not want to be associated with Macumba because it is frequently said to be practicing witchcraft and demon worship. I mentioned before in the story that people would come out and ring bells frequently, and we'd hear that very frequently in this area. People would come out and ring bells at certain hours or certain times of the day. That was more prevalent in this area than any other area in my mission. And as far as I can tell, this was to call in spirits into their home. Okay, so this is what we're dealing with. And I don't want to treat this as something that is not real. I believe that the people were practicing this spiritual belief because they believed it would work. And I think that they had... So my approach is this, and tell me if you think I'm crazy, Ethan. Okay. I believe that people are mostly rational. And so when they practice a religious belief system, I believe that they're doing so because they have some evidence, or they believe and feel that they have some evidence that it works for them. And I believe that they are having some sort of a spiritual experience doing this practice that I believe is actually not good and is actually, it should be considered black magic. But do you think I'm off base on this, or do you think it's just superstitious nonsense?
You know what? And it could go either way. It could be rooted just in deep superstition and culture, or it could be that they actually do believe that it works, or that they've had some sort of manifestation of it working.
Yeah.
I think there's plenty of not just your story, but there are many other missionaries who have had experiences, even with dark spirits. Maybe not this Macumbia, but with other dark spirits. They know that
That exists
that
anyway.
they exist, that they can be invited, that they can,
Yeah. Yeah, I think though that, and I'll tell my story and see, what the consensus is amongst the people here. Like I said, this is like a missionary side quest. I don't put much stock in this experience. I didn't even record this in my journal, but it's just something that has, repeatedly come up. And it might be worth mentioning in our record here of spiritual experiences as a sort of evidence that there is an opposition and evidence that there is evil spirits in the world. Might. We're trying to be very, more scientifically based on our empirical experiences on this channel rather than just trying to, place our own interpretation on these experiences. But anyway, I'll just tell my story and then people can sort of interpret it how they will. Anyway, so these spirits, they'd ring the bell, right? So they'd ring the bell to bring the spirits in, and they actually have a name for the spirits, and they're called Exu. The Exu are brought and summoned by different rituals. They're summoned by giving offerings like cigarettes, certain drinks will summon certain spirits. Depending on what you're trying to do, you want to summon the right spirit, and so you have to give the right offering, right? And that is actually very reminiscent of the pagan religions, in Europe. You give certain offerings to the gods, and the gods respond back. So we'd be teaching investigators, and they'd bring up this practice of Macumba and ask us if we knew anything about it, or and people would say that their neighbors were practitioners of it, and that they had been sacrificing chickens during certain times of the year, and that is to bring a certain spirit. I did read about that briefly. The sacrifice of chickens is, I think, more closely associated with the demonic practice of, the Macumbia that the other branches don't want to be associated with. I'm not sure, though. I'm trying to treat this very, with the sensitivity it deserves. But at the same time, it's just, they're all so closely mixed together. It's hard to distinguish between the different practices. I mean, as far as I can tell, all of them have this kind of belief that bringing spirits to accomplish a certain goal, that's a common thread throughout all of these religions, these religious practices. Another practice would be that they would burn incense to fill their home, the sacred space with smoke. They often perform these ceremonies, and I guess that they're called hiras. Anyway, let's just dive into what actually happened during this experience. So my companion and I, we were contacting, and I mentioned before that Argentina has these passages, like these pasajes that you have to go down in order to contact everyone. And we came to a pasaje that was near the park, the central park that I referenced previously, where all the roads spiderweb off of each other in a radial fashion. And we came to this passage and we went down it, and we thought that we had heard people back there, but when we went and clapped, there was nobody there. It seemed to us that we had heard people back there. And so we went and we clapped. You have to clap in Argentina in order to do the contacting. And anyway, we started to kind of feel a little uneasy because there was nobody there, and there was laundry there hung up. And so we just kind of looked around to see if there's anybody behind the laundry. We didn't see anybody. So we decided to head back out the passageway, and there's doors, that are lined up along this passageway of different entrances to homes. Oftentimes the doors are just open, and they have drapes hanging down in front of the door because it's so hot in Argentina and so humid You just have all the windows and the doors open all the time. And so we were walking back out of the passage and started getting this creepy feeling, like this kind of staticky kind of, but it was opposed to the feeling of the Holy Spirit, which is warm and loving. This was negative, and it felt staticky and not good. And as we passed this door, there was one particular door, the wind picked up and it blew through the house through the opposite side. It had been blowing the other direction previously, and it blew the curtain up so that it was like kind of hovering there, like as if something had like come out. I like to imagine there's something had come out, but I looked in and the house was completely darkened except for one red light bulb that was in the center of the room, and it kind of illuminated everything. And there was some sort of a shrine there. And they often have little shrines in Argentina, but generally it has little statuettes of the Virgin Mary, right? That's very common. But in this case, it was not the Virgin Mary. It was something. I don't remember anything distinct. I remember it was like wrongs or something to that effect. It was not good though. It looked gross is one way that I would describe it. It looked like they had made some sort of a shrine here to this black magic practice that they had been doing. I don't know what exactly what was there. I didn't get a very good look. But in the center of the room, they had drawn some sort of a pentagram. In what? I don't know. It looked red because the red light bulb was in the center of the room illuminating everything, but it looked like blood to me. And yeah, and just this wind passed through, and just the staticky feeling in the air, this heavy, kind of scary feeling was in the air. And I do believe that it was an evil spirit that was there. And we had passed by this house previously, and we did know that they were practitioners of this Macumba because we could see them ring, or we could hear them ringing the bell and see them, in this general area. So yeah, we got out of there really fast. We didn't have any, additional experiences with that. That was our little missionary side quest. You have any clarifying questions, I guess?
No. Maybe just a thought. Just a lot of times when, just in scripture stories or life, really, there's a lot of, from opposition, there's a lot of times it likes to mimic things of Christ. And so you can look at these, sacrifices. Obviously, sacrifices deep rooted in Christianity itself, being the atonement, the ultimate sacrifice. But then also before that, in the law of Moses, sacrifice of animals. So a lot of times the opposition, Satan, likes to mimic these things.
Yeah.
And then he has his own power and is able to, I believe, use people to enact his will as well, which is a little scary. So
yeah,
very possible that he was using these people to
enact some
create
power,
some sort of power. Yeah.
Well, and that has always stood out to me as something that yes, the mimicry of the wind, this idea in Pentecost, that there was this wind that passed through it. But like, as I said before, that there was a clear distinction between this feeling and the other feeling. And, I want to point out that, there's a lot of evangelicals out there who like to harp on Mormonism for our feelings, and I think that it would be beneficial to talk about what we mean when we say feelings. When we're saying feelings, we don't mean something that's internal. We do recognize that our feelings that it can be difficult to separate our own feelings from those that are given to us by the Holy Spirit. What I'm trying to say is that when we say feelings, we don't mean emotions. We mean things that we physically feel inside of us that don't come from us, that are coming from outside of us, inward, not inward out. And I know that it's difficult to separate those sometimes, and that's a matter of constant debate within our church, is trying to separate those things. But we are trying to do that. And of course, Jacob Hansen, talks about his 5, epistemological sources of truth. And that is also very important. And we do believe in that as well. But I think that it bears mentioning that when we say feelings, we have a different concept of a feeling rather than just emotion. These were feelings and these experiences that came from outside of me and influenced me from the outside in, not from the inside out.
Interesting.
Yes. So that, and I think that, why does God allow these things to happen? Because had I not had this experience, had I not had the other experience to compare it with in the same area, I would not have this
clarify
concept.
The wind coming through when you were giving the blessing, and then now this second wind that came through when there was something potentially demonic or
negative,
or satanic happening.
Yeah. So I think that there's things that we can learn from this, definitely, if we're willing to entertain the possibility that this actually happened. That there is something to this Macumba practice, that it is real and not just superstition. I think that a lot of people would just wave their hand at it and say, oh, this is just superstitious nonsense. But I think that we do need to recognize that there is evil out there, and there is evil practices even. And again, I don't want to say that all and because I don't have a full view of what they practice in all of these branches of Macumba, broadly speaking, these Afro-Brazilian religions. I don't want to say that all of them practice in the same way, but for what I have seen in Argentina, it seems to me to be an evil practice. So things that we can learn from it. I think that that's one important thing that I learned, being able to distinguish when these feelings are coming upon you rather than the other way. Just that this happened, we'll leave it to the audience to decide what this means to them. Maybe they've also had a similar experience. That brings us to our to our ask, if you have a spiritual experience that you want to share from your mission, I want to hear your stories. We want to record all of these spiritual experiences and create a database of them, an accurate database, so that we can provide some empirical evidence to support primarily God's hand in our life, but also the idea that there is a supernatural world beyond this material world. So in the description, I've left a link where you can fill out our form. It's a Google form. You click on it. It will ask you certain information like your name and your contact information, the date that your experience took place. You need to fill out a description. Just give us a brief description of what happened during this event. Thank you for watching. I think this is it for now. We'll see you next time. Thank you for watching Rise Zion. Before you go, I have an important ask. Please make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Our goal is to help fortify people's faith by providing some empirical evidence of God's hand in their life. However, if people can't find our videos or our channel, then our mission isn't accomplished. By liking and subscribing, you'll be helping us in this important mission. Thank you again, and until next time, bye.